Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullins, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.
So to those of you who have heard me speak before, I have a little bit of disappointing news, which is I planned this. And normally I'm a little more impromptu, and it's kind of what I do, is make things up on the spot. But in this case, I actually wrote some things down, which could make me not a good speaker. I'm not really here to talk to you about the 7 deadly sins that get you into a crisis. I'm going to leave those to the 4-way test, and I'm going to leave those to your own ethics, morals, your priest or minister or rabbi to keep you out of trouble. I'm talking about the things that happen when you're in a crisis that make the crisis much, much worse. Where something, whether you're a politician or a CEO or just a dad coming home to the electricity being off at the house, you have the ability to control what you say, so you do not end up on the evening news or worse, on your kid's Instagram feed with an embarrassing video of you falling apart. I'm using archetypes that we're all familiar with to try and illustrate some points about how to speak when you're in a high-stakes scenario of any kind, but I'm going to use some pretty good national examples that we're all familiar with. My goal isn't just to demonstrate what not to do. I'm also going to go through 7 virtues or antidotes to the anecdotes that you're about to hear. If you're keeping track, I've got 7 deadly sins and 7 virtues to cover in 20 minutes, which means if you don't like a story, it's going to be gone in 60 seconds or so. You can just kind of tune out for a minute, take a sip of your water, whatever. So where's my little clicker? There we go. For our first bad reaction, I'm going to start with pride. And putting your whims before the welfare of other people. An easy one for this is Elon Musk, certainly someone with a healthy ego, and showed the unhealthy side of it when he refuted a report that the company should have disclosed the death of a Tesla Model S owner in a crash sooner, arguing that the information wasn't material to the company. After a backlash that he lacked compassion and competence, he made it even worse by getting in a Twitter war, which we've seen people do from time to time, with Alan Murray, the president of Fortune magazine, about who was more in it for the money. Another great example of pride in the face of crisis was Tony Hayward, the CEO of BP, after the deaths of 11 people in the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, who told a reporter, "There's no one who wants this thing over more than I do. I'd like my life back." Which, that moment, we all remember it, we all think about it, and that was pride. That was putting yourself before other people. If pride cometh before the fall, there is no better antidote than humility. Rather than feigning meekness or faked contrition, your first reaction in a crisis should always be to express respect for authority. It's an amazing thing that it's hard for a CEO, a fallen politician, to be humble. But when they respect the institution which is bigger than them, admit that there is something more powerful than them, they look humble and usually are humbled by the moment where they say, we respect the rules of the EPA, we respect the Justice Department, we respect the New York Stock Exchange. That they put themselves in a position of being governed by something or someone when whatever they did may or may not have looked that way. Moving on, greed. Let's talk about Samsung. Within 2 weeks of the Galaxy Note 7, there had been 35 cell phones that had spontaneously combusted in the hands of their users, just blew up for no apparent reason. In this case, the delicate balance between timeliness and accuracy was compromised by a desire to downplay the significance of the product failure. Because this was supposed to be their game changer. This was their moment to beat out the iPhone. The first statement, I'm going to read it directly, and that's part of the reason I have these notes, because I want to be accurate with word choice, which people should be in a crisis. And these things were written by corporate communications folks on purpose with lawyer approval. Right? Although there have been only a small number of reported incidents, Samsung is taking great care to provide customers with necessary support. Samsung, why would you use your company's name twice in the statement about things blowing up? Has identified the affected inventory and stopped sales and shipments of those devices. For customers who already have a Galaxy Note 7, we'll voluntarily replace your current device with a new one over the coming weeks. They released a statement in Hong Kong saying, don't worry in Hong Kong because those are a completely different battery. Turned out not so much. And Hong Kong is famous for creating impromptu videos and putting them out on QQ, which is the largest social network in the world with more than 2 billion primarily Asian country members, and it spread like wildfire. The second statement they send out is at least a notion to caution to their users. We are asking users to power down their Galaxy Note 7s and exchange them as soon as possible. We are also collaborating with national regulatory bodies. But the company hadn't adhered to the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission's recall guidelines, causing chaos at phone stores nationwide, and more videos going on the web of phones blowing up while you're in line at the Verizon store. Their quick response, but desire to downplay frustrated customers and regulators. It kept coming back over and over and over again in the news, and impacted their reputation and may have shaved about $14 billion off of their value. These things have an impact. The best antidote to greed is charity. Demonstrate this by offering a truly sacrificial gift, something that costs you something. This is not Old Testament phone for a phone kind of justice. This is where you really have to give something up and dig deep. When a volcano in Iceland erupted in 2010, famously causing the biggest airspace shutdown in Europe since World War II, hoteliers were in a pickle. Guests had prepaid travel and non-refundable reservations, but were unable to get to the continent. And guests in their hotels had already paid for their family's vacation and were unable to leave. So you're in a place where you're operating a hotel on purpose to make money. Your new guests can't come, and your guests who are there probably can't afford to stay any longer after spending 2 weeks, and had nowhere to go. Immediate decisions were made to waive fees, refund rooms, offer stranded guests accommodations gratis. Hotels transferred money to other hotels around the world to pay for somebody to have their family vacation in South America or in Asia Pacific because they couldn't get to and from Europe. They removed all policies focusing on the light and warmth of hospitality, remembering what they're there for, to make people happy. And that summer, loyalty was won, even if short-term profits suffered. Now fun. We're going to go back to the long, long ago in the days before now, the prehistoric times, like really 1997. The Apple versus PC wars were well underway, which we have in my office today. Half of my staff use PCs, half of my staff use fruit as machines. Michael Dell was running a low-cost PC mail-order company that had revolutionized computer buying a decade before, but he was beginning to be threatened by Apple. He famously shared to the old-fashioned media, if he were in charge of Apple, he'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders. Dell has since said his comment was misconstrued, but that one's a little difficult for me to understand how you meant something different. So it started the 1997 version of them shooting back and forth in what we would now call a Twitter war, but instead it was in the old-fashioned newspaper and happened each and every day. Steve Jobs threw back, pretty much Apple and Dell are the only ones in this industry making money. They make it by being Walmart. We make it by innovation. The comparison to a Fortune 1 company was meant as an insult, and luckily Dell took it that way. The anecdote to envy is kindness. To demonstrate this virtue, you must express compassion for those who have been wronged. After the BP oil spill, the Department of Wildlife and Fisheries here began immediately receiving reports of wildlife affected by contaminants. Unfortunately for the state, the spill and its response was being handled by the federal government as it was in U.S. waters, not in state waters, and the department felt powerless to expend the funds to fix the problem. The oil was spreading. In order to engender kindness and compassion for our fishermen, oystermen, and our environment, the governor's office made a call for volunteers to send in photographs of affected animals. The governor's office started putting those photographs out through social media, and the photographs of brown pelicans covered in oil led to immediate action to try to save our birds, fish, and way of life. Without that effort to build awareness and compassion, we may not have been able to keep the brown pelican from returning to the endangered species list. Eliciting the anecdote to the sin is sometimes an awesome response when you're the victim of wrongdoing. Forcing someone else to do the thing that is on the good list instead of making them angry, making them more greedy, making them envious. Which brings us to sloth. Why on earth is anyone in this day and age unable to be reached for comment? At least have the... I mean, I could be reached right now. And if Stephanie Regal, who's not here, calls, I'm going to answer it. It's at the very least have the industry to return the call. Now, this particular story is difficult to keep track of as the details changed so regularly, but August 1st, 2016, a notorious cyber criminal began advertising 200 million Yahoo user credentials available for sale on the dark web. The company responded to inquiries saying, "We are aware of a claim," but admitted no breach and did not do any customer communication. A month later, the company admitted to being attacked by what some say were state-sponsored hackers in a breach in 2014, when 500 million user profiles were compromised. They didn't tell their customers, even at that point in time. 3 months later, Yahoo admitted that another billion accounts were hacked way back to 2013, and a year after the Verizon deal was closed, they admitted that all 3 billion of their accounts had been hacked. It reminds me of a National Lampoon line about Nixon. We need to find out what the president knew and when he stopped knowing it. When and whether Yahoo knew it had been hacked is still unconfirmed. But with the Verizon acquisition at stake for the company, they delayed sharing details, taking action, or making any changes to the company's protocols. In fact, it wasn't until September 22nd, 7 weeks after the dark web sale began, that the company even sent an email to their users. And to me, that's sloth of communications. When you read all of the notes and all of the stuff, the engineers were working very hard, but they weren't telling anyone what they were doing. So the opposite of that, opposite of sloth is diligence. In early February 2011, Tahrir Square became the epicenter for the Egyptian revolution against Hosni Mubarak. What started as 50,000 peaceful protesters turned into 18 days of violence throughout the country and continued the revolutions of the Arab Spring throughout the region. With bugged and truncated phone service, social media became the easiest way to spread messages, especially Twitter. This is where this story is one that I told at the Rotary offsite, which is where it got suggested that I should talk. And I spoke with the company that I was working for, and they said I could tell the story, but not identify them. So just use your imagination. I was manning the Twitter account of one of my clients with assets in Egypt when I received a direct message from someone claiming a sniper was lying in wait on the roof, and they could hear them talking into a radio and shooting into the crowds below. It took more than 90 minutes to find a satellite phone number of the manager on site who relayed that he had private security force available to secure the building. Tweeting back and forth location details to the manager, who used a radio to convey to his security team, we were able to find and disable the sniper. The exchange left me swirling that a revolution had started halfway around the world, and a business person conveyed to me through a social network for me to call a satellite phone for a radio for an off-duty policeman to keep people I've never met or ever will meet alive. And that's when I realized the world is small. And if you listen to the little things in the midst of a chaos and are persistent with your efforts, you can make a difference. There was nothing incumbent on me or the company I was working for that they should get involved on one side or the other. But we all had a diligent desire to try and keep people safe. So, lust naturally brings up pharmaceutical companies, but not the one you're thinking of. In this case, it is a lust for money or power. Mylan, the maker of the EpiPen, was embroiled in controversy over the pricing of allergy treatment medicine, the life-saving allergy treatment medicine. The company had increased the price of the drug from 2007 to 2016 from $93 to $608, an increase of 500%. Sure, this act of lust for money could be the cause of their crisis and why they're in my presentation, but they made it worse with their statement. However, as the health insurance environment has evolved, driven by the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, patients and families enrolled in high-deductible health insurance plans who are uninsured or who pay cash at the pharmacy have faced higher costs for their medicine. The statement was not just a lust for money or blaming politics in a politically controversial space. It was actually a play for power to turn the tide on their situation with a move towards checkmate. Unfortunately, they lost the game. In the next move, they were forced to sell a generic version for $10 a pen. This story unfortunately proves that violating one of the 7 deadly sins for communication can sometimes be a boon for profits. Their next quarter's earnings report was up $500 million on sales of the generic outside the U.S. Opposite of lust is chastity. To demonstrate this virtue, you should admit that what was done was wrong and work to distribute your power or money. In 2010, Bill and Melinda Gates started the Giving Pledge along with their friend and fellow billionaire, Warren Buffett. As part of that effort, they pledged to give most of their wealth to charity during their lifetime or commit to doing so after death. The Gates family's been making good on this pledge for nearly 2 decades through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which donates money in hopes of improving healthcare and bringing people out of poverty across the world. In the foundation's annual letter, Bill Gates explained why he and Melinda were giving away the Microsoft fortune. Comes down to two reasons. The work is meaningful and fun. Even before we got married, we talked about how we would eventually spend lots of time on philanthropy, he wrote in the letter. We think that's the basic responsibility of anyone with a lot of extra money. Once you've taken care of yourself and your children, the best use of extra wealth is to give it back to society. To stop making money and start giving it away is the ultimate reversal of a lust for money. Gluttony. People confuse gluttony and greed all of the time. Greed is the idea of driving towards wanting more. Gluttony is wanting more than you could even use. A man's refusal to give up his seat on an overbooked United Airlines flight led to a disturbing scene that had travelers up in arms over airline policies and procedures. Their first statement, quote, "This is an upsetting event to all of us here at United. I apologize for having to reaccommodate these customers." Have you seen the video? Reaccommodate? I mean, I'm good at word choice, but that's amazing. The second statement, 2 days later, while the facts and circumstances are still evolving, especially with respect as to why this customer defied Chicago aviation security officers the way he did, to give you a clearer picture of what transpired, I've included below a recap from preliminary reports filed by our employees. 2 days later, I continue to be disturbed by what happened on this flight, and I deeply apologize to the customer forcibly removed and to all customers aboard. No one should ever be mistreated this way. The entire point of this issue is that the airline was purposefully overbooking flights, and when caught at the game, they pretended it was the passenger's fault, instead of admitting their overindulgence. Opposite of gluttony is abstinence. For me, this is a very specific thing that I advise my clients on, which is do not claim it will never happen again. Because the minute you say it will never happen again, it happens again. But instead express a desire to create balances of errors in ideology. Oscar Moniz finally got it almost right in the final response to the United issue. We have committed to our customers and our employees we're going to fix what's broken. He added the wrong words, so it never happens again. First, we're committed that United will not ask law enforcement officers to remove passengers from flights unless it's a matter of safety and security, which is nice. Don't call the cops unless you need the cops. And it's a good way to start solving the process. He outlined 4 more policy changes in the statement. But that never happens again is sitting out there haunting him, because the moment someone captures something else on video, it'll be brought all back to the surface. On our last 2, wrath. The final deadly sin is anger, rage, hatred. Steve Jobs was, of course, a good example of envy. People envied him, but that frequently brought out his wrath. Most of his best quotes can't be, thank you. Most of his best quotes can't be quoted at Rotary, but here are a few ugly moments. Google raised his ire with their OS system that he thought was a blatant copy of his iOS, and he said, "I'm going to destroy Android because it's a stolen project. I'm willing to go thermonuclear war on this. I will spend my last dying breath if I need to, and every penny of Apple's $40 billion in the bank to right this wrong." Strong statements like this is why he may or may not have had a reputation for having a temper. My last lesson is patience, and I know I'm getting close on time. I've watched a lot of corporations get angry at the media, fallen from grace politicians holding their jackets over their heads, hands at the camera, saying, "No pictures, no comments." But I've found in my life the more patience you have for journalists, the more compassion you have them, the more fair the reporting is for you. If you've done wrong or tragedy is struck, it's their job to cover it. But if you make their lives a little more tolerable, they'll repay you most of the time with a balanced treatment. Hanging up on reporters, cussing them out for getting something wrong, sending an angry letter full of wrath doesn't improve your situation. It just makes it worse. Consider this. A celebrity died at a client's property, and instead of keeping the reporters off of private property and forcing them to stand on the street for hours without food, water, power, air conditioning, and forcing them to shoot video of the facade of the building with the property sign in the shot, we invited them inside, offered them catered meals, stripped the room of all logos, and asked that they respect the privacy of the grieving family and others on site by not mentioning the specific address or location to keep crowds at a minimum. Every reporter respected the request, and every reporter in that room had good things to say about the client for at least the last 6 years. Hating the media isn't logical. Have patience with them. Explain the details. If they are calling you, they want to get the story right. The most important thing to remember in a crisis is to stop thinking about the iceberg. If you're on the Titanic, don't worry about how big the iceberg is, where it came from, why you didn't see the iceberg. The iceberg doesn't matter anymore. Don't think about the boat. Don't think about the hole in the boat. The boat is sinking. Focus on the people. Because if you take care of the people, if you focus on the people, if you focus on doing something to right the wrong, if you focus on the future will take care of itself. So, thank you, Rotarians.
Support provided by Walters, Papillon, Thomas Cullens, LLC, specializing in business litigation and personal injury cases for over 40 years.